Next news update is at 9. Chicago's Morning Answer continues next on AM 560, The Answer.
Now, from the Signature Bank Studios. If you're looking for the latest news, insight into what it means, and the sharpest opinion, there's only one station in Chicago where you can turn, and it's this one. We're AM 560, The Answer.
Top of the morning, Dan and Amy. This is the kind of stuff that goes on, has been going on, regardless of who's been president of the United States. But it certainly can be ramped up depending on who is in charge of the executive and legislative branches, and to some extent the judiciary too. I'll give you an example of what I'm talking about. Jamal Brown, fire starter, you remember him, the guy that pulled the fire alarm because he didn't want a vote to take place.
What was the subject matter? Can you believe that? How do I forget?
Jamal Brown, before he was an esteemed member of the House of Representatives, was a teacher of some sort. Here's his open and notorious discussion about what he wants the federal government to do when it comes to imposing its will, at least his identitarian will, at the state and local level.
So I think the federal government should incentivize the implementation of DEI in states and school districts across the country. And by doing more DEI, we mean a culturally responsive curriculum that's rooted in BIPOC history, right, and culture, and the diversity of the human experience. But it also means recruiting diverse teachers into the classroom, which is a priority of mine because as a Black male teacher, I was one of part of 2% of teachers nationwide. That number might have gone down since COVID. And I knew my responsibility wasn't just as an educator. I knew it was as a mentor, a role model, a father figure.
Oh, my God.
Thus the problem with government K through 12 education and a lot of private K through 12 education too. But that's a good example of what you're up against. I mean, Title VI and Title IX, these are not hurdles to the Biden administration, and they're redefining it when you start to include gender identity, as they have. And so, what if Trump gets elected and he gets his cabinet appointments and so forth? And let's say the Republicans are in control of the Senate and the House, so you're not going to have a lot of appointees held up and you can get right to it. I mean, how can he do a better job of keeping the promise he made to drain the swamp back when he was elected in 2016? He certainly knows more about how Washington works or doesn't work now, but that doesn't mean that he's cracked the code. For more on that topic, some insights and suggestions, we're pleased to be joined by Mark Moyar. He is a former director of the Office for Civilian and Military Cooperation in the U.S. Agency for International Development. He currently serves as the William P. Harris Chair of Military History at one of our favorite universities, small list, Hillsdale College, of course, in Hillsdale, Michigan. Mark, thanks for joining us. Appreciate it.
Hey, great to be with you.
So, give us your recommendation for the kind of framework Trump should be operating from if he is reelected to, drain the proverbial swamp.
Yes, well, the most important thing he needs to do up front is to get the right personnel. So that was the biggest problem in the first Trump administration when I served, is that there was not enough preparation for leadership. And so you had people chosen all the way up to the cabinet level who were not really committed to Trump, and who ultimately, in some cases, including mine, sided with the career bureaucrats against Trump. And there are certainly already initiatives underway to make this happen. So hopefully they will be ready on day one with a slate of people who are prepared to really drain the swamp.
But what does that look like? I mean, the famous example of this, going back to the Reagan administration, was Jack Kemp, right? Jack Kemp, these agencies that Republicans keep saying should be eliminated, been saying for generations, Department of Energy, HUD, Department of Education, Department of Commerce, perhaps. And so he brings in Jack Kemp, who is the hope, growth, and opportunity, free marketeer kind of guy, said all sorts of things about how bad federal government housing policy was and what sort of distortions it created in the marketplace. So he's going to go in there in a HUD to reduce the punishment HUD inflicts on the country. And what does he do? He more than doubles the budget during his tenure. So how do you stop more like this, more like Milton Friedman? How do you get the wrong people to do the right thing? Because you may have some people that look good on paper, that have said all the right things, that turn out not to have the courage. And even if you do have the courage, then you still have a bunch of wrong people within the agency that you need to figure out a way to get to do the right thing.
Yeah, so I saw that personally within my agency, because we had some leaders who were committed to getting things done, but you also had these swamp creatures who were in it for themselves, and ultimately, even if they talked a good game, they were ultimately there about getting a good job when they left, and they were easily wooed by career bureaucrats who told them how great they were. So you need people who go in there with firm convictions and don't care what the bureaucrats say, and they don't care what the press says, because the press also will quickly jump on people who are trying to shake things up, because most of the media sympathizes with the bureaucrats. So you need people who are truly fearless and are not there to pad their resume and move on to the next nice job.
Yeah, but last time Trump could have gone after Hillary Clinton once he was elected, and he kept telling us he would, and then he got into office and he, just ignored the whole situation. What do you think?
Yes, well, of course, he also he needs a better attorney general, and he went through several, and again, it was, you saw in the Trump administration, towards the end, you saw some improvements, although in the case of DOJ, they still struggled to the bitter end, but I'm hopeful that this time around that they will get people who really know what they're doing and who are there for the good of the country and are not there just to go along and get along with the bureaucracy.
So, I mean, I'm trying to make this concrete. So, like, let's say he brings Betsy DeVos back as Secretary of Education, and so, and let's say that the goal is to minimize the Department of Education if you can't eliminate it, if you can't get the congressional action. So, one is you need to also be able to, even if you had Republican majorities, deal with Congress. So, what if you're Betsy DeVos, if you're the Secretary of Education, for example, I may actually make you the Secretary of Education. You're the Secretary of Education, and you go in. What do you do to drain that one small section of the swamp? Do you propose budgets that spend 10%, 20%, 50% less than was allocated and spent the previous fiscal year, and do that for a number of years to just sort of slowly minimize the footprint? What's the approach? What's the real world approach?
Yes, well, you do that. Now, there is the congressional part of it, and when I was at the U.S. Agency for International Development, the administration was proposing lower budgets, but you had members of Congress who were beholden to the aid lobby, and so they actually pushed forward current or even higher levels of spending. So it is certainly something the executive branch cannot do by itself, but I'm also hopeful we'll get enough people in Congress that recognize we need to make some severe cuts to some of these federal agencies.
So, I mean, again, it's a great catchphrase, and it sounds like it's simple to do, just slash and burn. But you have all of these institutional interests that pose real impediments, so you need to be shrewd about it. You also need to sort of rank order prioritize where you really want to focus the draining. And I wonder if you have thoughts on the rank order prioritization.
Well, I think there is need for major reforms to the civil service, and there are some proposals already underway to shift some positions into political appointee positions, and I think that is very important. I saw a lot of bureaucratic subversion, and it's an uphill battle to try to get rid of these people, and that also, again, requires help from Congress. But you can, at minimum, do what I saw happen sometimes in the Trump administration, is basically you find ways for these subversive senior bureaucrats to be pushed aside and put into jobs where they're not doing much, which isn't great, of course, because you're still having to pay them, but it's better than having these people in positions of real authority.
Can you think of did you see or can you think of a success story in this vein, something that even may have been a small success, but it provides a model to scale or to replicate, anything like that?
Yeah, well, there was, in my agency, there was an effort to break away from the large contracting organizations that usually got all this money from the agency, and it was kind of a corrupt system. And so that leadership said, we want to work with small groups and we want faith-based groups. But the bureaucracy came back and said, we're going to give all the money to these big mega contractors that give to lobbyists and are all staffed with Democrats. And so they did punish one of the senior bureaucrats and removed her from her position of power. But again, they weren't able to actually remove her from federal service, but they put her into a job where she was really not doing anything important.
So it seems to me that, one, like you mentioned, this isn't perhaps talked about enough. And as you sort of alluded to, there's an effort right now afoot by the Biden administration to provide more civil service protections to federal bureaucrats because they're concerned about the very thing that you're talking about. So it seems to me this maybe is something that should be more pronounced in terms of a GOP governing agenda and talked about more openly, is that here's one of the things that we need to do, this reform of how civil service works in the federal government, and suffer the slings and arrows. Oh my gosh, you're trying to politicize a nonpartisan workforce, which we know is complete bull jive, and focus on that. And say, so this is something that, the leadership of House Republicans and Senate Republicans, commits to move to the president's desk in short order upon reelection. It's not a sexy thing, but it gives the sort of power that's required to really start to have, the ability to restructure, reimagine these agencies and, frankly, reduce their size and scope.
Yes, and I recently wrote an article in The Blaze about this and how we really ought to increase the number of political appointees, because right now the ratio of political appointees to federal bureaucrats is about 1 to 550. And anyone who's worked in an organization knows that one person cannot really keep good track of 550 people. And there are, there's some bureaucrats who do their job effectively, but there are quite a few who try to subvert the administration, especially the Republican administration. Most of them are more sympathetic to Biden, so they're less likely to do it. But we certainly saw with Trump, and certainly if he gets reelected, we're going to see new efforts to try to undermine him, where, again, you need this committed political leadership to really find out what's going on and to hold people accountable.
Yeah, right. The idea that for some reason, again, this exemption the federal government enjoys of so many non-at-will employees is absurd. The administration, people sort of start from the premise, the administration should be able to have its own team, the president should get his cabinet, and so on and so forth. But then, what good is that in terms of holding him accountable for management if his team can't have any impact on the permanent administrative state? And that seems to me, I think, a pretty reasonable argument that Republicans could make.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's kind of similar to the problem we see with teachers unions too, is that it's almost impossible to fire some of these people, no matter how much, unless they, commit murder or something like that. There's all these union protections. And then there's also, as I talk about in the new book, there's this EEO bureaucracy that people will hide behind too, and will file an EEO complaint for just about any effort to hold them accountable. And so I did see some changes at my agency when I was there where they made it a bit more difficult to file these complaints, but it's still a system, I think, that's rife with abuse.
The book he mentioned is Masters of Corruption, How the Federal Bureaucracy Sabotaged the Trump Presidency, and it is out tomorrow. Masters of Corruption is the book. Mark Moyar is the author, former director of the Office for Civilian Military Cooperation at the U.S. Agency for National Development. Now he is the William P. Harris Chair of Military History at Hillsdale College in Michigan. Mark, thanks so much for joining us. Good luck with the book.
Great. Thank you for having me.
Thank you. And he joined us on our turnkey.pro answer line.
It's news, opinion, insight. This is Chicago's Morning Answer on AM 560. The Answer.
This is Jerry Boyer for townhall.com. We just got the new unemployment claims, and they've spiked up to the highest level in 18 months. Consumer confidence is down, and inflation is still above average. Yes, the stock market is up, but so are gold prices, which suggests that the markets are rising not on expectations of a good economy, but on expectations of the Fed going back to pumping money into markets. President Biden tries to blame corporate greed